Okay, on air it says now, Lucy. So I'm going to make a start pretty quickly. We have 385 parents are with us, are looking in, and that will go up quite rapidly shortly. I think we could have, several hundred more attending, I think. So I'm going to jump in. My name is Emmet Major, and I'm the coordinator of this program called Planet Youth that we're operating in the west of Ireland. A lot of you parents out here that I'm talking to will know a little bit about this or may have heard of it. There's a lot of parents who have come from our national schools in Galway, Mayo and Roscommon, but we have a wider audience tonight because there are other people looking in nationally and actually several internationally, I know. So I just wanted to do a tiny bit of explaining what this is all about, and I'm going to hand you over to Lucy, and I'm going to explain a little bit about how this evening is going to go. I'm going to lay that out for you in a second as well. But just to touch on Planet Youth, this is kind of why we're all here tonight. So Planet Youth, it's a public health program that we're operating over in the west of Ireland. It's a big undertaking, and it's designed to improve the health and well-being long-term for all our school-going population. So it's children that we have currently in secondary school, but also children that are currently even starting national school and working their way through national school. It's supported by a lot of our big agencies in the region, all our secondary schools in the region, but these will be the big statutory bodies that you might be familiar with, some of the logos like the HSE and TUSLA, that kind of thing. And if you want to know any bit more about it, planetyouth.ie, www.planetyouth.ie is our website. And this is actually where I'll be putting the recording of this video up on Friday. But I'll be sending out information about that. Okay, so the reason that we brought Planet Youth here to Ireland is because this is a model that was developed in Iceland and an approach called primary prevention that was used to reduce what were the highest substance use rates in the developed world at the time. They brought those down over the course of about 15 years and have kept them down since, using this idea called primary prevention. Okay. In Iceland, very much the focus being on substance use. Here in Ireland, we're going to be using it to look at the health and well-being more holistically and more generally of our young people. And some of the things immediately we're going to be trying to address using it is things like sleep, screen use, our mental health, physical activity being one as well, substance use certainly. And how it works, right, is by essentially reducing the risk factors in the lives of young people, right, in these four big areas. So what's going on at home, how are they getting on extracurricular outside of school, what are they doing in their spare time, their peer group, how are they getting on in their school. So these are the big influencing factors on the lives of young people. And by making small little tweaks and changes in the way they grow up, in the environment, in the social environment it would be called, the children are growing up in, they do better over time, right, quite substantially better. Okay, so just how that works, data-driven. Every 2 years we do this massive undertaking. It's a huge survey in all 81 schools in Galway, Mayo, Roscommon of our teenagers at 15 and 16 when they come back to school having sat the junior cert. So that'll be a little bit away for a lot of the parents here tonight to think, well, why are we talking about that? It's because the information that they fill in this very extensive survey tells us all about the risk and protective factors in their lives. And we're using that information to make small changes earlier on for their siblings, for younger children. So for the 6, the 8, 10, and the 12-year-olds. And if we can make enough small changes, they will improve by the time they get to do this survey when they're 15 and 16. I hope that makes sense, right? So this is the undertaking of the survey itself. That's a couple of my ladies helping get ready back in November. The latest version of the survey was done in December 2020. It was shipped to Reykjavik. It's optically scanned up there, and they return the data set to us here in Ireland, and we develop our county reports for, as you see here, Mayo, for Galway, for Roscommon. 52-page documents on the website there, very extensive. Don't need to go into that now, but one of the big things that we do every September and October in our secondary schools is the distribution of this guidelines booklet for parents, right? So this is anybody who's got a 12 and 13-year-old starting into secondary school in Galway, Mayo and Roscommon at the moment, right? And in the booklet we have guidelines, simple guidelines now around things like, what survey is about, family time. One of the things that we touch on is screen time, bedtime certainly. And just to try and give parents a bit of guidance on that kind of stuff. I'm not going to dwell on this because it's not really something we want to be talking to. But one of the few things that we do try and emphasize, and we do this kind of presentation at a lot of the first year induction evenings in our schools out here, is that there's huge power in parents working together, in having common boundaries, in sharing information, and knowing other parents, attending school events, being in the parent association. You can see it all on the screen here. It actually has a massive amount of protective value. Where if you know the peers of your friends of your children and so on, right? So this is one of the reasons I'm going to come on to this in a second, that we operate in the webinar tonight. But the other thing I wanted to tell you about very quickly is this is a new booklet that we're currently developing. We'll be ready at the end of November. and this is called Parent Power, and it's a guidelines booklet for parents of primary school children, right? So we currently have the one for secondary school, but we're very interested in trying to work much more in the national school space, because if we want to make significant changes using a primary prevention approach, it's with the younger children and parents of younger children that really need to hear some of this kind of stuff. So the new booklet will have certainly some information around things like sleep and bedtime. This is a work in progress at the moment, but I just want to give you a bit of an idea what it'll look like. There'll be stuff in there in and around screen time. These are the topics really that will be in it. There's probably going to be 6, main sections. So family time, sleep and bedtime, screen time, hobbies and sports. Making small steps is the idea of making, little changes here and there at home if you feel you need to. The other thing that we're trying to get to really is this idea of parents working together. Like I said, there's massive power in it. And one of the things that's worked very well in other jurisdictions that have done Planet Youth and are doing Planet Youth successfully is the idea, even in like a class group, whether it's a class of first class parents or second class parents or junior infant parents, but the idea that parents can come together and agree on certain things, that will make life easier for the children, for themselves, for the school as they're getting older. So we did a little bit of work in this in the west of Ireland with some schools, and we're going to be operating this as a pilot idea in Galway City, in Ballinsloe, Roscommon, in North Mayo quite shortly. And it's the idea that if there was an agreement around the birthday parties, or if there was an agreement, that nobody's going to get a phone until, secondary school, or there was an agreement around, simple things like maybe screen time, what have you. It's up to the parents to decide, really. We won't be trying to decide for them, but people can decide in their own class groups. So that's the thinking, right? We want to see what the appetite is like for that here in Ireland. I think it's quite a good way of working, and it's certainly a lot of interest in it. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd be delighted to hear them. Just to move things along a bit, that was that whole idea that parents working together can do a huge amount. There'll be a new website from the Planet Youth domain related to it. It'll be called Parent Power, as the whole project is really called, parentpower.planetyouth.ie. It'll be ready in the new year, but at the moment it's just there as a holding page or a coming soon, right? So there's a little bit of information. But if anybody wants to get in touch, that's the way to do it, info@planetyouth.ie. Okay, and I'm going to bring us right back to why we're here tonight, right? And as I say, that extensive survey, it's done every 2 years. Roughly 5,000 young people did it, but we're most interested in the kids who are 15 and 16, right? And these are the results that from our latest survey, right? Amongst some of them, it's a huge amount of stuff, but this is just a tiny bit of it. And one of the things that was quite remarkable, really, was what we were seeing in and around the sleep that our young people are getting, right? So here we see at 9 hours or more, right, 10% of the children are telling us that's what they're getting, right? Now, that's the recommended amount of sleep for 15 and 16-year-old, is 9 hours, right? After that, 8 hours is sort of okay. They're doing okay at 8 hours. But we add those two together, it gives us 41% of our children at that age are getting enough sleep, and 59% are not, right? So at 7 hours, at 6 hours, at less than 6 hours is not enough sleep. And they are doing, the kids that are getting enough sleep, the 41% are doing better in every single measurable way in the survey than the ones who are not getting enough sleep. And just to show you that very quickly now, this is the correlation, what we see in the data between sleep and self-reported mental health, right? So the children that are telling us at 9 hours and 8 hours, you can see 67, 62% say, I feel like good or very good mental health. And then after that, you can see how dramatic it is. And over here, we've got that 59% of kids are all the way down here, right? So there's something very remarkable happening around sleep. Okay, schoolwork hard. These are, again, it's a correlation between children who say, I often or always find my schoolwork is hard. And again, how dramatically it impacts, there, we can see it ramping up. Maybe not quite as dramatic a fall or ramp up as the mental health, but it's certainly very significant. School engagement is another one I'm going to show you very quickly. And school engagement, it hasn't really anything to do with study or, academia or passing tests or anything. School engagement basically just means enjoying school and being happy going into school and doing well in school. Not doing well, enjoying school is probably the best way to put it, right? And again, it's a very similar graph that we would see for the mental health. So the children who are getting their 8 or 9 hours are much higher than the children who aren't sleeping well. So that was one of the reasons, really. And that I'm going to hand you over to Lucy now very shortly. But I hope you found that interesting. If you want to get in touch at any time, please do so. I'm going to stop the share now, right? And I'm just to explain. The plan for this, I'm going to turn my camera off in a second, Lucy, and I'm going to leave you to it, right? But we're going to try and take questions at the end, right? There's a chat function here to the right, and you'll be able to submit, if you have any questions, fire them in, right? I know that Lucy's going to cover a whole pile of stuff, right? So we might find that your questions being answered as we go, and we're aiming to finish in about an hour's time, at around 8:15, right? So depending on how long you take, Lucy, we'll give whatever time we have remaining to questions, and we'll try and field as much as we can. I can't guarantee we're going to get to them all. And if you're submitting a question, what I'd suggest is that you don't use your name. Just put down the details. Maybe don't even use your child's name, but I have a son or a daughter, this is the issue, just to kind of keep it more anonymous if you can. And that's mostly it. Other than to say, I'm going to this is a session that's going to be recorded, and I'll try and get this up on Friday morning on the planettooth.ie website under the video section. And what I will also try and do is have the captioning put on, so anybody who's maybe hard, that's going to struggle without the captioning, it'd be useful for them. And that's it. If you're happy enough with that, Lucy, is there anything I've missed, do you think? Or
no, I think we're good.
Okay, good. So I'm going to turn my camera off, and without further ado, the person you've all come to here, Lucy Wolfe.
Okay, thanks so much, Emmet, and thanks so much for all of you for joining us tonight. I was very passionate about hearing about what Emmet's studies were showing in terms of the correlation between how our children were faring and the correlation between their lack of sleep, and which is why I said that I would get involved. Look, we know that sleep is necessary for our children to be optimally functioning. Like, sleep itself is not just rest, it's supervising a wide variety of biological maintenance jobs, supporting our immunity, our muscle growth, our emotions, and our brain processing. And it's important that we, as parents, can do whatever we can to help them to get enough sleep. And because we know that without adequate sleep, that we're at an increased risk for reduced alertness, daytime sleepiness, low mood, lack of motivation, concentration, poor decision-making skills, negative thinking patterns, poor judgment, less creativity, and of course absenteeism as well. And that's the kind of day-by-day implications. And then long-term, obviously, as we're getting older, more risk for depression, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and on. So I guess for that reason, we would put an awful lot of emphasis on our children's sleep. I'm going to cover very quickly just a few basics around sleep before I talk to you about what we might do to help improve the quality and the quantity of our children's sleep. There are two processes that regulate our sleep. Falling asleep and staying asleep and napping when it's age irrelevant are all rooted in our biology. And just like language and motor skills, our sleep matures over the first years of our children's lives. And as our children grow, the patterns and the physiology of their sleep change. And just understanding what's going on in the brain and the body can sometimes make it a little bit easier or better to help us support our child's sleep development. There are two main processes, like I say, the homeostatic drive and the circadian system. I always try to get parents to think of the circadian or the homeostatic drive almost like a balloon. And so it's the pressure that builds that is then released when we sleep. And then, of course, the circadian rhythm is a powerful internal clock, and it's nestled in the brain, and it's a biological pacemaker, and it controls the circadian rhythm, which allows us to initiate light and dark, the pattern of night or day and night, and it sends messages that influence our waking patterns and obviously other biological processes. When these systems interact and influence, they influence when and how long our children sleep. And of course, the best quality of sleep happens when these two systems are coordinated or in sync with each other. Obviously, we have types of sleep. So we have our deep sleep and our light sleep, so REM sleep and and NREM sleep, and they have their own stages as well. So NREM sleep is the deep sleep. It goes through 3 of its own stages, and when our sleep is matured from around 3 to 4 months of age onwards, the sleep cycle is about 90 minutes in duration. And I guess what the piece that I feel is important around that is that when we transition between our sleep phases, we all have what I might describe as being a partial arousal. And that partial arousal is when we are alternating through our sleep phases. And it's often at this point, as a child is transitioning through a sleep phase, that they may need a parent to come and do something for them, which leads to nighttime waking. And it can often lead to some of the sleep challenges that parents experience and report. So in terms of how much sleep we need, in the age profile that we're talking about this evening, 6 to 12 years of age, the general recommendation is somewhere between 9 to 11 hours in the overnight period. And of course, we focus on both quality and quantity. And again, we'll talk about how we might achieve that for our children as this evening unfolds. I guess common sleep difficulties for most families will be that your child maybe has trouble falling asleep. They may resist bedtime. They may prefer a later bedtime than you would like them to have. They may wake in the overnight period. They may wake frequently, or they may wake for long periods. They may be restless in their sleep. They may have early morning waking, and they may not feel well rested. To put this in context for you, nearly 40% of parents report sleep challenges in this age group. And somewhere between 15 and 25% of you will report bedtime resistance, with 10% of you maybe reporting the delay in sleep, so later bedtime and anxiety around bedtime. And of course, then maybe 10% of you reporting daytime sleepiness as well. And of course, we do know, depending on which study you read, somewhere between 40 to 70% of us will struggle with our children's sleep at some point in our parenting career. So with all that in mind, I always try to get you to think about what influences your child's sleep. And there are a great many influences on your child's sleeping pattern. And sometimes I just distill it this way and say that, look, everything they think, everything they feel, everything they see, do, hear, eat, and drink affects their sleep. And everything that you think and feel, see, and do influences your child's sleep. And essentially, it's really all about relationship. Your child's relationship with their sleep, with you, with themselves, their relationship with their sleep environment, activity, food, the emotional and physical temperature, textures, scents, and noises. And then, of course, we also have further underlying issues, underlying medical issues that, of course, can contribute to the sleep challenges that parents experience. Those items may be reflux, food sensitivities, intolerances, coughs, asthmas, upper respiratory, upper airway issues, sleep apnea, sleep disorders breathing, skin problems like eczema, dental problems. Now, tonight we're going to talk about what I might describe as behaviorally induced sleep challenges. And I'll always encourage you to speak with your GP if you have any concerns that there could be something underlying that's also contributing to the challenges that your child's sleep, that you're experiencing with your child's sleep. So sleep has its own design properties, and studies demonstrate certain dynamics that contribute to our children's sleep pattern and profile. The first one I would describe as sleep associations. So what are the conditions that your child requires when they are going to sleep, and what do they require overnight? We know that children who rely on what I might call external forces, so those external forces could be parental presence, drinks, falling asleep not in a bed or in their bedroom, needing music playing, needing a television on. So if they need something to get to sleep, unless that need is a constant through the night, often when they transition through their sleep phases, those partial arousals become complete arousals because they need those items to be put back in place, those associations. So the simplest one probably is a child that needs a parent present. If the parent is present when they're falling asleep, and then they leave them once they're asleep, when they start to transition through those natural sleep phases, the parent is no longer there. They'll wake and they'll call for you and they'll look for you, or they'll come into your bedroom and they'll look for you to sleep with them and essentially help knit their sleep cycles together. So sleep associations and how your child experiences their sleep is a big part of some of the sleep challenges that you'll experience. And it's seconded then with what I might describe as being biological timekeeping. And so this is all to do with that circadian system that I briefly mentioned earlier. And if I just distill that really easily, it's all to do with what time your child wakes at, what time they go to bed at, what time they go to sleep at. Do these times vary? Are they coordinated with that internal body clock? Children who are overtired, and children are overtired generally as a derivative of the issue. If your child's not getting enough sleep or the sleep is interrupted. So sometimes children aren't getting enough sleep because the bedtime is too late to support the amount of sleep that they need, and their wake time is necessary because of school. And some children aren't getting enough sleep because their sleep is routinely interrupted. So it's not consolidated restorative sleep as a result. Children who are overtired, their bodies have a chemical response. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. And this chemical response can make it hard for them to go to sleep. So this often contributes to the late sleep onset. But it also makes it difficult for your child to maintain their sleep as well. Now, I know that you will have a variety of issues, as in you won't just have one of those. The common causes of sleep challenges can be attributed to overtiredness or not tired enough. They can be because your child is overstimulated, or that maybe they weren't adequately prepared for bedtime in the first place. Irregularity is a big undermining influence to your child's sleep profile. So that might be irregular or late wake time. So a wake time that is one time during the week and very different on the weekend, and bedtimes as well that vary hugely. That circadian system asks for regularity. If the environment's not conducive to sleep, then it also can undermine your child's sleep process. And of course, if your child has an association like a parent-orientated need at bedtime, or if you have drinks too close to sleep time, or conditions change when your child is falling asleep, they have fears, stress, and anxiety, the sleeping location changes overnight. And if we have unpredictable responses, then all of these things can be cause factors for the challenges that you experience. So let's talk about bedtime. With this particular age group that we're talking about tonight, so 6 to 12 years of age, 5 to 12 years of age, bedtime is more predictable in the younger age profile. So generally up to around age 8, the natural bedtime for a young child probably ranges between 7 and 8:30, in and around that area. And of course, there will be variability. But as your child gets a little bit older, bedtime does become more individual, and it will depend on many factors. I'm going to get you to think a little bit about, I guess, considerations to help establish your child's bedtime. I'm going to get you to think about their mood and behavior. I mentioned earlier about overtiredness and how that when your child is overtired, they have that cortisol into the system. So think about a child's mood and behavior: irritable, cranky, visibly tired, intense eye rubbing, non-compliant, clumsy, entertaining, hyper, can all be representative of overtiredness. So when you're thinking about establishing the bedtime in your home, I'm going to get you to think about your child's mood and behavior in the evening time. Also going to get you to think about their wake time and how much sleep they actually need. And maybe we sometimes have to do a little bit of backward math, so that if we're going to try to commit to even the lower range of their need of, let's say, 9 to 11 hours or 9 hours, what time is wake time, which is generally determined naturally by the body or having to wake up for school. And then if we backward that, what time should bedtime be as a result of that? Another consideration is maybe how long it takes your child to go to sleep. And then finally, maybe what works for the family unit itself. Think as we would begin to address sleep challenges, first of all, in terms of how long it takes a child to go to sleep, general consensus is that falling asleep in about 20 minutes is considered appropriate. I know from working with children there will be variability, and I guess I'd be probably a little bit more flexible around that, thinking that, you know, taking anywhere from 10 to 30 to 40 minutes to get to sleep would be considered within the normal range. And what I might consider, as I would be working on helping establish better bedtimes, I would maybe even have a later bedtime and then gradually bring it forward, rather than trying to do everything at the same time. So if you have a child who's easily getting to sleep at a later time, it might be worth operating under that for a while and then slowly bringing bedtime forward once we figure out what other items need to change within your child's sleep profile. I mentioned there earlier about the causes that contribute to the challenges that you experience. And one of the things I mentioned was drinks too close to sleep time. And I often think it's a surprising one for families, that it's not unusual for a child to have a drink of water before bedtime. And in some children will maybe even still have milk before bedtime. And again, often this is like an external force and it's helping a child get to sleep, but it doesn't help to keep them asleep. And as a result of that, the night wakings continue, the parental support is needed, and the issues tend to continue manifest all of the time, which leads to nighttime waking, changing sleeping locations, and interrupted sleep and early waking, and all of the issues very similar to the issues that you will be reporting. So if we're going to take some steps towards better sleep, going to start getting you to think about the bedtime and the time that might work for your family, your child, based on their mood and behavior, and also based on their wake time, and knowing how much sleep they need to get. When I'm working with a much younger child, I'm generally fairly prescriptive around timing, but once your child starts getting older, the landscape changes a little bit, and so there is more almost exploration on the parents' part required to see what bedtime seems to work for your child. But there are other definite steps that we can take to keep moving your child's sleep in the right direction and preparing what I might describe as being a fertile ground. And from that fertile ground, we can attempt to grow your child's nourishing sleep profile. First decision I'd probably encourage you to make is to decide and to define where you want your child to actually sleep. And where they fall asleep is ideally where they will wake. And so within that, I suppose, what I often see is maybe a child not falling asleep in their own bed, or not falling asleep in a bedroom, but falling asleep on a couch, watching television, or falling asleep in their own bedroom and ultimately coming into your bedroom, which continues to fan the flames of the sleep challenges that parents experience. So earmarking and deciding and defining the sleep place, their bedroom, their bed, or of course your bedroom, their bed, your bed, but that it's defined and that it's not changeable, and that within that, you would work to create what I might describe as being a suitable sleep-friendly environment. And when we're looking at creating a suitable sleep-friendly environment, I will consider all of the senses. So, you know, dark, ideally to help initiate the production of the sleep hormone melatonin when it's time for sleep. Cool, so we tend to sleep better in a cooler environment. And also, at this time of year, it's worth having the bedrooms at a lower temperature than the rest of the house. Our body temperature naturally drops when we're getting ready to sleep. But of course, if the temperature of the bedroom is quite warm, then that can often inhibit the cocktail of hormones that we're looking for to help invite sleep. So I'll be looking for cool, comfortable, dark, without distraction. And I will always get you to think of the senses. So what they're seeing, that it would be maybe not too busy a space. And of course, what they're the textures, the scents, that they're in the bedroom, and that we're looking for it to lend itself to sleep. I will always encourage, when we're working towards improving sleep profiles, that we have a regular wake time, 7 days a week. So whatever the wake time needs to be during the week, that should continue all through the week. And it shouldn't really vary. And if it does vary, it probably shouldn't vary much more than 30 minutes to 1 hour. If you're routinely struggling with your child's sleep, if you're routinely struggling with bedtime, especially, I would pick a time and I would stick to it for at least a month to 6 weeks. And within that, I'll always make sure that the wake time that you have allows for a calm start to the day. So we are going to talk about bedtime routines, but what we don't often talk enough about are post-sleep rituals. How we wake sets the tone for the day. So again, your child will either be waking naturally or you will be waking your child. And it's important that that time is the same, like I say, every day, and that we get up and we move to the function of exposing to light, and obviously beginning your eating and sleeping pattern, or your eating pattern throughout the course of the day. You'll know that outside activity and fresh air is really important to regulate our sleeping patterns. And it's also important that we don't have strenuous activity or sports too close to sleep time either, which obviously I know can often be a difficulty with training. The recommendation is that we don't have that level of activity 2 to 3 hours beforehand. And I know, again, like I said, that can be a challenge with training. But again, I just want you to be thinking about the things that maybe are undermining your child's sleep profile at this moment in time. And of course, what can we do to help that? I think understanding that bright and natural light exposure by day has positive implications to our children's sleeping patterns. And then so too can initiating a dimmer, darker environment as sleep and bedtime approaches. Regularity is key for that circadian system. So regular wake times, regular meal times. And again, I will always get you to consider as well foods and drinks that don't necessarily help sleep. Anti-sleep foods might include definitely caffeine. Caffeine can be in lots of things that are unexpected. So just be mindful of that. Sugar, processed food, high sugar foods, and refined carbohydrates are not sleep friendly. And again, within that, I would always avoid heavy meals too close to sleep time. But I might look at a light snack, and I'm going to include a sleep superfood list on the slides that Emmet will post on the website. They include snack, whole meal, banana, warm milk, all have sleep inducing properties. And that is sometimes a good idea to look at as we start to move towards calming activities and our actual bedtime routine itself. You know that I'm going to suggest that we avoid TV electronics at least an hour or more before bedtime. And I will, of course, encourage parents to set a loving boundary around this. And I think sometimes it's a good idea that if we model what we're asking for our children as well. I mentioned earlier about how drinks can have an effect on your child's sleep. And I know that it can often come as a little bit of a surprise that something as small as a sip of water close to sleep time can have an impact on your child's sleep ability. But it is the case. And literature supports that we generally need at least 30 minutes between drinking and sleep. But in terms of practice informed, I would say we need at least 45 minutes. So I always, when I'm working on improving sleep, I generally move drinks out of the context of the bedtime routine and look at how that is impacting your overnight as well. I think when we move forward to making sleep changes, it's important that you engage and involve your child in any new sleep approach. I think engaging them and trusting them with the changes that we're making, it would be important. And that I always encourage a family meeting around this, helping your child become a willing and active participant in any changes that we are planning to make. Once you've identified a suitable bedtime for your household, I would normally begin with wind down calming activities about an hour before the actual bedtime routine begins. And this helps to build a bridge towards achieving sleep. I know myself, I have 4 children and it's a busy household. And I know in the evening time, there is a huge competition of needs between getting dinner, getting homeworks done, dropping to training, collecting from dance. And sometimes we forget that our children need an opportunity to slow down and relax before we ever begin the big separation that becomes sleep. So I'm almost here proposing like a 2 factor bedtime change, where we have calming activities, and I'm going to give you some suggestions that might happen downstairs in a dimly lit environment that change the tone of the household unit. And then we introduce also a bedtime routine that happens in the bedroom that your child is going to sleep in, and that you as parent will decide on the ratio of how much the bedtime routine is parent accompanied versus self-directed, based on your child's age and what they need from you, what they have needed from you historically. And I'm going to propose as well that I would just reserve the bed itself for sleep only, and that any routine activities that we'll include as part of a bedtime routine would happen outside of the bed, so that the only thing that happens in the bed is sleep itself. And that is also quite helpful too. Some calming activities that you can be introduced into the household about an hour or so before the bedtime routine begins. So let's say you feel 9 o'clock is the time that you would like your child to get to sleep by. Then I'd nearly suggest by 7:30, you would begin closing things down and introduce some calming activities. And they would be about an hour before your actual bedtime routine begins, because then your bedtime routine happening in the bedroom will be about 20 minutes in duration before lights out. So this is a segue, if you like. I think it's fair to say that it is a deep-seated need for each child to feel seen and heard, safe and secure and belonging to your holding world of family. And it's important that we're creating a loving and attentive, warm and responsive family culture that honors your children's individuality, and that we know that children flourish with our loving presence. So having one-to-one time, having connected time with each of our children, nothing to do with sleep, with plenty of dialogue, lots of eye contact, and physical touch, and practicing active listening and being wholly available to them, and being not distracted by modern life, can really help our children to feel grounded and more open to becoming separated from you, and not then needing to maybe have the stalling tactics, the notice bids that happen around sleep time, and that we can have a smoother transition to bedtime and sleep itself. So those calming activities, I might recommend listening to music, reading, doing a word search, doing a crossword, drawing, colouring, wooden puzzles, jigsaws, or just family time. Some of those activities do not need to be parent supervised. Of course they don't, and depending on your child's age. But the point is kind of unplugging them from the devices and the gadgets, and then initiating a calmer sense before we look to the separation time. One transition that I found really helpful in my family as my children were getting older was introducing like a concept of a family meeting where we all gathered and we just had chats about the day. The gadgets were naturally not in use as a result. And then that was a segue into the next part, which is your child's bedtime routine. In terms of creating a positive bedtime routine, I obviously would need you to adjust the activities based on your child's age group. But your bedtime routine proper, so it's distinct to the calming activities, are ideally in the bedroom that your child is going to sleep in. And I know a lot of you here tonight would be thinking that you've got other children, and how do you manage all the children, and my idea of taking a child on their own. And again, I suppose it's about trying to figure things out. If you have one child in the family that's particularly struggling with their sleep, I would nearly always take them out of the busyness of the household. The calming activities can be family orientated. Everyone can partake in those. But let's say a bedtime routine in the child's bedroom, I might recommend at the very beginning that might be a parent on with one child. Or of course, depending on your child's age, as they're getting a little bit older, you might have a ratio of some of it's parent attended and some of the bedtime routine is self-directed by your child. I guess a lot of children's issues that I would see are where the parent is still required to support the child to sleep at bedtime, or they won't stay in their bed, or they keep calling you to come back, which delays bedtime and frustrates everyone. And so these activities are designed to start to stop the need for the callbacks and the stalling tactics, because we're really giving of ourselves wholly and exclusively at a very vulnerable time for children, especially when they're a little bit on the overtired side as well. I think if we're going to do a bedtime, I would say 20 minutes before the time that you anticipate lights out, or the time that you would like your child to be close to going to sleep. I think it's a good idea often to support bedtime with visual aids like checklists that can be stuck on the wall that show the process of bedtime or the bedtime routine. So for example, you know, we brush our teeth, we go into the bedroom, we get into our sleep clothes, we read 2 books together, you read 1 chapter on your own, and again you modify this based on your child's age range. I think often when you're making changes, creating a storyboard or even a photo book helps to reinforce the changes that you're introducing. So for example, I might take pictures of the house, like the kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom, and show our children in words and in pictures, you know, we eat our dinner in the kitchen, we brush our teeth in the bathroom, we go up to the bedroom, we're going to read 2 books, we're going to do 3 chats, we're going to sing 2 songs, we're going to have, you know, we're going to engage for this length of time. And another visual cue I might use is a lamp on a timer, which also signals it's the end of the bedtime routine. It's the start to go to sleep. And on top of that, I create a visual cue where I might have a bedtime zone. So maybe a rug on the floor, cushions, maybe a canopy. And it's in this space I would do the bedtime routine. So again, either with the parent or more with your child operating themselves. But then at the end of the bedtime routine, it's lights out. And now we get into bed and now it's time to close our eyes and go to sleep. So I hope that's making sense, that there's a sequence of events that's unfolding here. So you can hear that. Ideally, it's logical and linear, the sequence to bedtime, that each step of your bedtime routine brings you closer to getting to sleep. And in that, it's important that you have the same ritual each night, so the same order of events. I might encourage that you limit bedtime activities to maybe 3 to 6 items, and they might include like a foot rub, story time, cuddles. I often talk about, especially slightly younger children, you know, encourage them to chat to you, you know, tell me 3 things that you like to do today, 2 things that you're looking forward to tomorrow, and that you're really encouraging your child to connect with you. You're indulging in lots of physical contact, lots of eye contact, and you're really encouraging that sense of belonging, which again, I find helps the separation when it's time to sleep then on the other side of it. And I think it's important that we create a beginning, a middle and an end to the bedtime process to again avoid the stalling tactics and to ensure the maximum connection. Other activities for your bedtime routine might include relaxation exercises, breathing exercises, visualizations, and some meditation as well. And again, I'll just give you the suggestions, and you might find that certain ones resonate and feel like your child will be attracted to them. And each activity that we're introducing, we are moving us closer to having that calm bedtime process, which again makes achieving sleep easier for all of us. And again, I really think it's important that we create space for your child's involvement and their own sense of being in charge of what happens and when it happens, so that their choices and that their engagement with your support is prioritized as you're unfolding the bedtime process. One specific challenge for families is that your children need the parent present. So the question really is, how do you help a child learn to sleep on their own at bedtime, if that's what you want, and as a result help them to maintain their sleep? And again, some children won't have obvious parental need, so you won't be present, but you might have to come in and out of the bedroom 20 or 30 times before they actually go to sleep, or your child routinely gets out of the bed looking for you. And again, when we're working on that, the interventions, first of all, will only be effective really when they're coupled with the preceding recommendations, so that essentially we're looking at what's happening during the day, we're looking at what we're eating, what we're drinking, when we're eating and drinking, when we're exercising, when we're exposing ourselves, how we are relaxing as the evening unfolds, and how then we are introducing our bedtime routine. And all these steps bring us closer to positive sleep practices. But then we may have to introduce an intervention to help your child to learn to fall asleep without parental input. And as we do that, I would suggest that you would always start at bedtime. And I'll always recommend my stay and support approach, which is a stage-based approach to help make a transition between something that you've been doing that you now might need to change. So, for example, it's ideal for parents who are already staying, like maybe sleeping in the bed as your child is getting to sleep, lying in the bed as they're getting to sleep, or for parents who are being called back routinely, or of course the child who routinely gets out of bed. So if we were putting all this together, then I would maybe introduce the stay and support approach, which really allows for parents to make changes like removing the drinks from bedtime and any extras, maybe holding hands, laying with your child, maybe establishing sleep in a bed rather than a sofa, and that you would be encouraged following the end of the bedtime routine to maybe sit beside the bed rather than lay in the bed, and to support your child in a very physical way, completely verbally and emotionally, as we help them get used to the changes. So any changes that we introduce to your bedtime, your child's sleep process, will possibly require your support then to help them through it. And that's where the stay and support approach comes into play, and that you'd be very available to your child in that capacity if it's needed. And you might spend maybe the first 7 nights beside the bed, and then slowly I would move you through stages, so that you might move into the middle of the room and be there for a couple of nights, and then you might move to the door frame, and then eventually maybe after 2 to 3 weeks you might work your way out into the hallway, because what you're trying to create is what we might call an independent sleeper. So a child is experiencing their sleep and getting to sleep themselves. And I suppose the important considerations really around this is that we may need to look at boundaries and loving limit setting, and we may also need to continue to adjust bedtime backwards or forwards, so that it's not taking your child ages to go to sleep based on the bedtime that you've selected, but also that bedtime isn't being delayed because they're overstimulated by your presence, or they refuse to stay in their bed. So again, there's lots of items that are party to the process that we're trying to eliminate as we go. What I think is important to mention is that although we'll always start at bedtime, if your child is experiencing frequent nighttime wakening, you're experiencing your child changing the sleeping location, like coming into your bed, and now at this point you feel it's something that you'd like to address, then we normally work on the overnight then at the same time. So you start at bedtime, and then overnight when they come into your bedroom, instead of letting them come into the bed as before, you might return them to their bed and again sit beside them and support them and work through the stages, so that you're really encouraging a higher level of sleepability at bedtime. And as you're doing that, you're also initiating your child's ability to start to stitch their sleep phases together without drinks, maybe without hand holding, because these items are not sustainable necessarily without your input, or they're leading to disturbed sleep. So if you're having lots of drinks and your child's getting up to use the loo loads, so again, it's about trying to look at the things that are maybe not helping your child achieve the optimum level of sleep that we're hoping for all of the time. Another intervention that may sometimes help a family is using a checking in system, so that you may already not need to stay with your child, but you may have to do a lot of toing and froing. Now, if there's lots of toing and froing, I stop that behavior by going and being with them, and then I slowly work my way out of the room. But lots of your children will just need a brief reassurance or an affirmation, and that the aim of briefly reassuring them and going to them is done on a kind of like a paced time basis, and you're helping them become more secure in the overall context of their sleep, trusting them, showing them and demonstrating to them that they know how to do this, and that they'll do it with your support. And as you're doing that, you're modifying bedtime so that you're achieving bedtime at an optimum time for your particular child, based on their age and based on what they're showing you, and how long it might be taking them. And what you might find, you may have a really late bedtime at the moment, and you may feel it's not appropriate, and you may feel that it is quick. But as you're working on, let's say, reducing parental input, slowly you can bring forward bedtime by 15 minutes each night, until you get to a time that you feel is appropriate and your child is getting enough sleep, but also that it's still not taking your child too long to get to sleep, because otherwise we build up a high level of frustration around that. Another simple intervention, sometimes if you're feeling that you're not as needing as much intervention as needing to stay with your child, but you may need to help them, you know, stay in the bed or stop calling out or stop coming downstairs is like a bedtime pass. So it's like a token system. I'm not mad about incentives or rewards, but if I was going to use this particular practice, I would probably use a people reward incentive, so that you might have a couple of tokens that allows for call out or for getting out of bed. But if they don't use the tokens, they can be exchanged for maybe an activity or time with you or a trip to the swimming pool or something along those lines rather than anything else. What I will say to you is that when you work towards improving your child's sleep, it does take time to establish new concepts and ways of being in your household. And I'm more than mindful that I'm speaking as if there's maybe only one child, where there could be 3 or 4 children. But often when we are having sleep challenges with 1 or 2, we're better off taking one child on their own to begin with, and then methodically working through that situation. And once that feels like it's improving, we can turn our attention to the others. And then, of course, it's often possible, if you have a lot of young children sort of the same age range, that we could have our calming activities all together, and then we can split our time between bedtime routines that are self-directed and parent supported, depending on what feels right for you. But I guess what you're probably hearing is that there's a lot of time investment on your part to help bridge the gap between where you would be hoping to go and what maybe is currently happening, and that it's time spent, but it's also looking at the time on the clock and having that regularity that really helps to regulate the body clock, which then of course helps your child's body get to sleep with greater ease, needing less from you, which then opens up the channels for your child to stay asleep for longer, deeper and more. I think when you're working on it, you probably will need to review it and adjust it. I think it's helpful to keep a sleep journal so you can help identify what is working and what's not working. And I think obviously it's very important that you're kind to yourself, you're patient and you're confident, which will help you to be predictable and continually encourage nourishing sleep for your family. Mentioned earlier about having unpredictable responses as being one reason why children's sleep is disturbed. And unpredictable responses are when we sometimes do things. So sometimes we're really strict around bedtime, and we maybe even lose our cool around bedtime. And sometimes we do agree to one more story or one more conversation or 5 more minutes. Or sometimes we're very determined to return our children to their own bed, but at 5 o'clock in the morning, we let them back into our bed. Or some nights we're very determined not to sleep with them, and we do that for a couple of days, and then we go back to what we were doing. And that often keeps reopening the wound of the challenge that you've been trying to mend. So I would mention that predictability is very important as you work through your child's sleep issues. Now, I know that there will be a huge amount of individuality to the challenges that a lot of you or some of you will be experiencing. So I'm hoping that Emmet will be able to open the chat room for you to add or comment, and we'll hopefully maybe work through some of the challenges that you are actually experiencing and see, can we help you through that this evening?
Aha, I'm back. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Thanks, Lucy. I was plugging away here, doing my best to try and record everything and going back through emails that people had submitted and getting everything into one Word document, and we'll try and get through what we can here. Hang on a second. Have it open here. And thanks for doing that. You covered a huge amount of ground. You really did, right? So what I'll say to people is that I'm going to try and I'll cover this right before we finish, is that I'll try and get this up on the Planet Youth website as a recording on Friday. I'll show you that where it's going to be now in a second. And also what I'll do is I'll put up the slides that you prepared, and I'll put up the slides that I did as well as part of that. So people can look here for the recording, and below that there'll be the link if you want to download the presentations as well. Okay, so we'll just try and get the ground now. And apologies here, Lucy, because what you might find is that, hang on a second, you're asking me something I've already covered. And the reason the reason I might do that is because I'm trying to spin a couple of plates. So I'm hopefully most of what you said in, but maybe not all of it. Okay, so I'm going to go right back here. There's a couple here that kind of on the same theme. So I wonder about a 4-year-old who previously slept through the night and now wakes up multiple times and needs parents there to go back. So he seems to be frightened. I have a question on a child 5 who wakes every night saying she's scared, doesn't know what she's scared of, just feels scared when she wakes up. She does it 3 or 4 times every night, calls me. I talk to her for a few minutes, reassure her, she goes back to sleep. So it's a couple there that are similar in a way.
I know, and look, fear and anxiety, and as children get older and as we are adults, are, stress and anxiety make up a huge part of sleep challenges. And I suppose for our children who are experiencing those feelings, it's about trying to help them cope through those emotions, because it's a very valid fear for a young child to feel scared of the dark, to worry that if they're on their own, they're not safe. And really, it's about creating that family culture that they can feel safe within. So I'd always be validating how they're feeling, but at the same time, I'm trying to do everything I can to help them feel safe. And sometimes it's worth, looking at exercises to help them process exactly what it is that they're worried about. But we try to maybe process that during the day rather than at bedtime, which then let's say we're all feeling a little bit vulnerable at that time. So I suppose it's getting underneath exactly what's going on, and really, if there is fears, what they stem from, what is the cause of the fear, and can we uncover that, and then can we support them through it? Because sometimes it gets built into, it began as a fear, but it kind of transcends into a habit. So it's a bit like if you go in and you say, why did you wake? Did you have a scary dream? And your child might say, oh, I did have a scary dream, because it becomes, let's say, part of the narrative. So I would be helping to feel safe and secure, showing them they're safe and secure, processing things during the day. And there's lots of really good books that you can look with your child through. So let's say a really normal one that I would come across as being scared of the dark. So again, I might start playing games in the dark, using torches, getting our children used to playing in the dark and being in the dark. And then I might look at having nightlight in the bedroom or a string of fairy lights. And then I'm always reassuring them, but I'm not feeding the fear either by saying, look, I have to stay with you, because otherwise, if I don't stay with you, you won't be safe. So it's about creating that fine line with our children. You're safe. This is how I help you to feel safe. And then you're not fanning the flames of that parental need to get back to sleep. Now, it's there at the moment. So then what happens is we would try and use the stay and support approach. But you can hear there, Emmet, it's multifaceted. There's so many things that are affecting your child's sleep. So they're saying, I'm scared, and they need you to get back into bed with them. But each time you get back into bed with them, you're creating that kind of behaviorally induced dynamic. So if we can build up to it with the bedtime process, the calming activities beforehand, make sure there's no drinks as part of bedtime. That's a real big one. And I get your child to put it into the dishwasher, the sink, say goodnight to it. And again, just make sure that there's nothing kind of like innocuous undermining your child's sleep process is what I'd say.
Thanks for that. Couple here. Well, come on. Well, there's loads here. There's actually loads and loads of ones. I'm not sure we'll get through them all, but sleeping through the night. Okay, no problems getting children to sleep, but early waking, all constantly. So is there any thoughts around that?
Did you have an age group there at all, Emmet?
7.
So I guess it depends on what early waking really is representative of. So for me, anything before 6 a.m. is early waking. Beyond 6 a.m., it's kind of normal for a lot of children. No, I think this is
more 3, 4 a.m., that kind of territory.
Grand. So again, the funny thing about early waking is bedtime being too late is often a big reason why the waking is early. So it sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? You think to get a later wake time, let's move bedtime out. Whereas actually bedtime coming forward and eliminating that vulnerability to being overtired will mean your child goes to bed more rested, if that's a poor description, but if you know what I mean, without that overtired surge, then they maybe maintain their sleep process or their sleep profile or their sleep tendency just that little bit better. But again, I would look at the other items. What does your child need to get to sleep? Is music playing? And then that goes off and that's going to mean that they could wake up with the brain searching for that. So whatever conditions are present when your child is going to sleep, they either need to be a constant through the whole sleep period or they shouldn't be there at all.
Okay, I have one here around, I suppose you could say maybe special needs and autism. There's a few, I'm going to try and bundle them together a little bit maybe, but just the special needs community have a lot of struggles around sleep. a child that's on melatonin to help sleep, any tips on keeping her sleep? And actually another parent sent in something that kind of in a way very similar, that they tried melatonin under medical advice, did aid falling asleep but didn't maintain sleep. So those two are actually saying the same
and
thing.
that's the common thing, because the melatonin is only going to make your child sleepy or get them to go to sleep with greater ease, but it probably isn't going to maintain their sleep. When we have a special needs diagnosis, your child's sleep profile is not hugely different. What we tend to see is that maybe they have shorter sleep totals. So their sleep need can be slightly shorter, or we have this situation where they find it more difficult to switch off. Now, because they've already been prescribed melatonin, they've managed to deal with that piece. But now I'd get you to look at what other things are contributing. What are your child's sleep associations? What do they need to get to sleep? I can't give you the statistic off the top of my head, but a lot of the time when parents are struggling with children's sleep, it's to do with parental input. It's to do with the parent being present when the child gets to sleep in the first place. And then the brain cannot get through the natural sleep phases without looking for more of the same. And then that doesn't mean to say when you come back into the bed or the bedroom with them, they'll go back to sleep, because they're in a sleep deprived state. They often sleep less and less and stay awake for longer periods of time. When I'm trying to correct waking, I often bring forward bedtime significantly to try to establish the natural bedtime. Now that gets trickier and trickier as the child gets older, because not only does the sleep profile change a little bit in terms of the biological bedtime, but also the emotional landscape changes as well. However, if I'm really struggling to try and get, a family to, start to see consolidated sleep, never afraid of bringing forward bedtime significantly. And as I bring bedtime forward significantly, start the bedtime routine and the calming activity much earlier than maybe even you think it would be correct. And then I look at that association piece. There will always be association pieces, behaviorally induced, because it's like a derivative of the issue. How do you get them back to sleep? You nearly have to go and do something for them. And that on its own, so they might go to sleep with no parent present, but the parent always shares the bed with them when they wake. Then that's a sleep segment all on its own.
Thanks for that. Siblings, okay, now where we might have a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old, and okay, how do you navigate that a little bit better, where the 5?
And I think that is often the case when you have older children in the household. It's a busier household, there's more stuff going on, which is one of the reasons why tonight I wasn't saying specifically this is what bedtime needs to be, because it needs to suit the family unit as well, and we need to figure that out. The other side of that is, if you've got a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old, I generally would be encouraging that, let's say the 5-year-old definitely needs a different bedtime to the 10-year-old, if that makes any sense to you, that the 5-year-old needs an earlier bedtime. But then I encourage your 5-year-old to go to bed earlier by attracting them to the bedtime routine that they'd have with you and you exclusively, and that they see that as a bonus of getting time with you while your 10-year-old is doing something else, if that makes sense to you. I think the other challenge comes when you have, like I mentioned earlier, siblings and they're all quite close in age and they maybe all have a very similar need around bedtime. Once sleep and the processes for sleep are a little bit more established in your house, there's no reason why we can't have almost a kind of one communal calming activities, one bedtime routine, and everybody distributed to their respective beds, and an expectation that they can achieve their sleep for you on that basis. But just like anything that we do with our children, these things all take time, and they take a lot of organization and patience on our part to try and get right, which is why I normally say if you've got a child, 2 children with sleep issues, deal with one at a time rather than trying to do it as a group effort.
Thanks for that. What about a change, like a 10-year-old who's all of a sudden started developing sleep problems? Absolutely convinced there's nothing in school, no worries or stress, and that, nothing that's troubling the child per se, but out of nowhere, out of the blue, this is starting to become a habit.
I know. And I suppose I generally feel though something out of the blue is probably emotionally driven in some capacity. And again, look, there's always lots going on emotionally, developmentally, and hormonally as well, as you're heading, towards puberty and things shift. And I know we're going to be talking about teenagers next week, but they naturally, their bedtimes get later by hormonal shifts. Now at 10, we wouldn't necessarily see that, but I think our children as well, we've had this cohort of children who've lived in a pandemic and, they've been in lockdown. And so even though, let's say, you can be sure that maybe everything is okay, but how he's experiencing things. And I really would want to talk with him, nothing to do with sleep, to see, you know, really how is it for him, and possibly what is it that maybe is contributing to the challenges that he's experiencing. And then very slowly and lovingly, I implement the bits and pieces that we've talked about tonight, because you'll slowly get underneath whatever is challenging him, you know, whatever fears and anxieties are there, and lots of different strategies that we can do to help our children develop coping mechanisms and styles to, you know, help them, you know, be self-managed with your support. And then, of course, the principles for sleep hygiene don't need to change. We can just keep slowly implementing them and encouraging them. And again, I'd be encouraging someone in this age group, you know, write it down. Let's draw it out. Let's see what it is that's really keeping you up or making it harder for you. And over time, you'll get underneath it. And I suppose the other things I'll always look at, you know, is there anything there underlying? You know, do we need to go and have a visit to the GP to make anything out of the blue? I'm always curious about, if that makes any sense to you.
Sure. Yeah. And it's kind of, you mentioned that before in a slightly different roundabout way, but the idea maybe it's a journal or keeping a sleep record or that kind of thing could be very helpful.
Yeah, like I think twofold. Like I suppose I'd be a big advocate of journaling for emotional health anyway, if I'm honest with you. And I think our own children can be encouraged once they are able to write, that I think it's a great way of expressing yourself and helping you to process things. So I'd be very much advocate of that practice. But on the other side of that, whenever we're identifiable, when we're routinely keeping that record, and I'd make that recommendation for adults as well that are working on their sleep, you know, keep a record so we can see what's going on.
Okay. And there's one here that says, you mentioned maybe not using a reward system. Why was that? Why would that be?
Because I think that those reward systems, and this is, let's say, a personal and professional perspective on my part, I think can ultimately lead to lowering self-esteem. You know, that if we're kind of bargaining with our children to do things that maybe could just be organically helped to emerge, I will be much more in favor of that. Now, that's not to say I wouldn't do some level of incentives like I talk about, but you see, I'm just not really mad about like star rewards would be very common for younger children. I own children that couldn't care less about getting a star on a chart. And I suppose a lot of what I do myself in practice, I mean, I have observed my own children and kind of going, that just doesn't feel right. So again, I'm never going to rule something out completely, but just let's say in my practice, I'm not mad about rewards in their purest format. I much prefer to, I guess, reach the goals in a collaborative way, that everybody is working towards a common goal, but it's not necessarily behavior based. If you do this, you're going to get that.
Can you just do a tiny bit, if you don't mind, Lucy, on napping for the young, right down
Yeah.
this bottom young age, 4, 5, 6, that kind of thing? Any
So,
thoughts about it, or time it should be?
So generally most children will need a nap up to around age 3. And again, I can't give you the statistic off the top of my head now, but let's say I think about 25% of children are still napping at 4, and then maybe 10% of children are still napping at 5. I will be a big fan of the nap, provided the nap doesn't affect bedtime. So again, the nap up to age 3 or so is generally needed. But in somewhere between age 2 to 3, lots of parents will experience the nap causing problems at bedtime. And that doesn't necessarily mean the nap needs to go, but it might mean that the nap needs to be doctored a little bit. So cut to keep promoting bedtime. And then as your child gets closer to 3, you might get to a stage where you don't need the nap, and then they can preserve their daytime awakeness with just one sleep phase, which is the overnight. But even as you go through that transition, you might still have naps every now and then. For a child who's really not sleeping great in any age, I'd never be afraid of a nap, you know. However, I probably would not let naps happen after 2:30 p.m. If I was letting one happen. And of course, a lot of our children are in school until 1:30 or 2:30 p.m. So that might not work. But I'm never afraid of it if your child fell asleep in the car and you're on the way to somewhere. What that is showing you is that they're trying to make up a loss of sleep somewhere once they've gone beyond the age that a nap would typically be needed.
question about white noise machines. Maybe a
Yeah.
tiny bit of thought on that. Have you used them, or would you
Yeah.
at this age? Or
So I think anything that helps your child sleep, I'll always promote. However, I'm never always convinced that something like white noise is. Like, I think it's really helpful for babies because it can help, regulate the heartbeat, reminiscent of the womb. And of course, it can help them get into a deeper sleep quicker. And I think it can be very helpful. And of course, it can still be helpful as your children get older. But I do get to the stage where, and I had this conversation with a client today, are we using white noise as a buffer for noise, for sound, so dog barking next door, or they need it from a noise perspective, and your child is younger, I suppose I normally offload it. Now, if you have a verbal child, they may not like it anyway, and they might tell you that. So if they like it and you can keep it on all night, great. But I suppose it's only a sleep support. It's not really going to make your child sleep through the night unless maybe we've got all the other parameters in place. So that's that experiential. How am I experiencing my sleep? What do I need? Essentially, our children, as they get older, need to be able to put themselves to sleep without external forces. Now, that can be a long road, Emmet, and it's not one you always have to go down. But I suppose if you're here and we're still experiencing sleep challenges, then we'd look at the experience of sleep and then what do I need to get back to sleep? And they live independently of each other, but they fight with each other at the same time.
Lucy, thank you so much. Right, we've covered a huge amount of ground, right? And just before we wrap things up, as I was saying, I'll just share the screen very quickly with you. You're looking here at the Planet Youth website, planetyouth.ie it's called, and you can see, I'll come across here, there's the home, the about, and so on and so forth, right? But what I'm going to do is under resources and videos, right? That's a section that we have different little bits of video over the last while, all sorts of bits and pieces on there, right? But what I'm going to do on Friday is the next one on the list will be a recording of the presentation tonight. And within that, if you click on that, for example, you could go into one of these, you click into the particular video, and this will take you in. And in the writing down here, what I'll do there is I'll put the links to the downloads of the presentations, right? So I hope everybody found it useful. The fact that you've covered so much ground, Lucy, it's almost overwhelming to take it all in. But just, so what I'm going to do is I'll put it up and I'll put a few categories and timestamp it as best I can to say, explaining, bedtime routines, or I'll put kind of little bits of stuff that people can jump into a little bit, the areas that might interest them a little bit more. But it's all been fantastic. I'd like to say thanks very much. Final thing really is I was touched on the idea of the new booklet and the new project we're working on, the National Schools booklet for parents, and the idea of parents working together a bit more. That's Parent Power. If anybody's interested in that, please just get in touch through the info, info at Planet Youth, or the contact page is over here. Always happy to talk to people about Planet Youth at any time. So that's it, I think, Lucy. Is there anything else you'd like to say to wrap it up?
No, only to say thanks for having me. I was a little bit out of my comfort zone because that my base work is with younger children, but I couldn't help but say yes because I'm so passionate about helping people understand sleep more and move forward and get better sleep if they can.
Yeah. Well, like you say, when we do our big biannual survey of the teenagers, it's really extraordinary, what we're seeing there in how impactful it is in all these other aspects of their life. So feeling is if it's something that we can get into better routines and as they're younger, teenagers, life as a teenager is challenging enough, but
yeah,
it's every little bit we can do at this age, I think, is going to be important.
Yeah, early intervention is key. And I suppose the other side of that is, that everybody can be helped to sleep better. Like, I really don't encourage parents to feel that, it's just the way it is. My child needs less than everybody else. They've always been like that. Their granddad didn't sleep much. Like, I really always just focus on the individual child and trying to do whatever we can in a really loving and responsive way to help support their sleep profile, which of course will then let it emerge what it actually is. What is their sleep need and how can they be optimally rested?
All right. Listen, there's lots of really fantastic thank yous and everything. You can see it streaming down the chat there. So people are very appreciative of your time, as am I. So that's kind of it, really. We're going to wrap it up with that. And I'm just going to hit the hang up and everyone's just going to stop, right? But I'll be putting a recording up, as I said, on Friday. And thanks everybody that managed to come tonight. And if it's something you feel, a colleague or peer or sibling or that might be interested in, you can tell them where to find the recording. So that's it. And thanks, everybody.